All right, Chapter 3, branch connections. Does anybody got a branch office or work at a branch office? We had lots of branch offices. So when we say that, we usually just mean, some spoke off of the mothership, some spore hanging off the side. We've discussed broadband varieties ad nauseum, but I recommend you go back through and take a look at that if you'd like. So you've heard of cable? I like the little breakouts. That one's broke. Doesn't even do anything. So somewhere on Sweet Street, there is a head end for Comcast here in town. And on that head end, there is a bunch of antennae that look up into the southern hemisphere, towards the equator, where there are a bunch of geosynchronous space boxes falling towards the Earth, but managing to miss the entire time, called satellites. They catch the signals off of those, mux them together into a bunch of video feeds, and send those down this trunk towards Mr. and Mrs. cable subscribers' home over a wire that they must then amplify to keep the signal working as it goes on down the road. And thanks to those folks laying all that cable, we also have the old cable modems over DOCSIS, the Data Over Cable Service Interface Specification, which is a mouthful, but it's just how your cable modem makes the internets happen. So over on their end, they have a cable modem termination system of some sort. Basically, the modem on their side of this whole cable modem equation, and then on your end, you have a cable modem that talks to that.
Does the puppy do anything?
No. I'm telling you, 6.0. The 6.0 material, somebody fell asleep at the wheel. Started dropping buttons on things that didn't need buttons. So, buttons aside, you have these here cable modems. And we've had this conversation. Who's on the old HFC networks? Who's got a cable modem subscription? Anybody had a chance to watch the way the link fires up? Most cable modems have a handful of buttons on them. Usually it will try and acquire an upstream signal. And then once that happens, it lets them know that you're there so that CMTS says, oh, we've got somebody trying to connect. And then when it sends a response back, you get some blinking light that says downstream. And then they connect, and then usually after that, there is a little link that sets up and says, data, interwebs, or I'm working. Take a look at the little words underneath the random lights, and you might be, wait, you're on satellite, right? There's probably just the same type of stuff. There's probably an upstream and a downstream, and hey, you are getting ripped off stream. There's gotta be a manual somewhere that tells you what those are. So before we jump to satellite, digital subscriber lines or asymmetric digital subscriber lines. So since there is more space for different frequencies on phone lines, on the plain old telephone system or plain old telephone service, depending on who you're talking to. After you've used up that first 4 kilohertz so that people can talk to one another over voice communication, there is a whole bunch of spectrum left to be used for sending data back and forth. And so that's what ADSL does. If it was not ADSL and it was DSL, it would be equal. Since people tend to download more than they upload, they make it asynchronous. You can use those remaining hertzes them remaining frequencies in order to provide data, and that's how the DSL do. They use that remaining bandwidth on that phone wire to provide upstream and downstream. If you don't want to hate your internet connection, there's a physical limitation due to attenuation on phone lines. So the signal gets weaker and goes away the further it goes. That is somewhere around 5K. And here it says 5.46. So somewhere north of 3 miles, just barely, you have to be that close to the phone company's termination, or it's not going to work very well. And I think I bored you with the story about when I first moved out to the sticks. Somebody tried to set me up with an, they called it Reach DSL, where basically they just hoped that it would work beyond that 3.5 mile distance, and instead discovered that it would not. What's that? That she's too far from the.
Yeah.
That would not be
Is there
surprising.
a way to tell where those are? Like, is that public information?
Probably not. I'm sure the phone company doesn't like publishing the specifics of their network. But if you can get into the diagnostics on the cable modem, you might, or the DSL modem, you might learn something. If you can. So transceiver transmits and receives, usually connected to your computer by USB, less likely connected to your computer by USB, or to a modem device that you plug into a router of some sort. And then on the other end, there is the DSLAM, the DSL access multiplier. This thing here. And the DSLAM, which as far as acronyms go, I like that one. Allows multiple people on the same loop, again within that attenuation distance, to talk to the same connection. Cisco would be more than happy to sell you both sides of that equation. So they'd sell you the broadband routers, they'd sell you the aggregation router for the DSLAM side of things. They will hook you up. If you want to take any potential interference out of the connection, there are filters you can add to your phone line so that as it travels over this 3.9 and 5.46 kilometer distance, it filters out any of the cruft that might be screwing up your connection, which is nice, makes it work better. And particularly if you live in noisy environments or has to go past some kind of, the same kind of problems you have with Ethernet. If it goes past anything that generates a lot of RF, it's going to screw with your signal. If it generates a lot of electromagnetic interference, you're in trouble. RF inherently generates EF, so this is the stuff that the man is trying to keep you down from. In a perfect, happy, utopian future, we all could get municipal Wi-Fi set up, and they would work with one broadband provider to buy a huge pipe that connected everybody in an area out to the internet. But Comcast, Charter, AT&T, Sprint, Verizon, probably not T-Mobile because they tend to be pretty cool, but big internet service providers fight tooth and nail to make sure that when these little brush fires start up, that they get stomped down pretty fast, because they don't want to be in the position where they are selling internet next to someone giving away internet, because you can see how that would make their business model a little challenged. Hard to sell water by the riverside.
Do you know any of the reason how it's like how they get away with squashing that?
Well, you hear about it cropping up somewhere, and you say, "Dear local politician, you know, we are big constituents of you, and we donated X number of dollars to your campaign. And AT&T really thinks that these sorts of events are not good for, you know, this, well, they're not good for competition, and without competition, we don't have really good, innovation, and without innovation, where are we? So we need to innovate. We can't have this municipal nonsense. So yeah, it is an interesting exercise. I would invite you to do a little research, but that's the crux of it. Well, yeah, and these are political moves, right? If I get myself elected to be mayor of Rockford and say, by God, Rockford's going to have municipal Wi-Fi, you can bet they're calling pretty quick to say, hey, you know, we just invested a couple of $1 million putting wires down the road to you guys. Why don't you not do that? They're going to be a little heated about it. Dirty, dirty pool is what it is. I don't know. Maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe it just hasn't taken off because people don't like free stuff.
I doubt that's the case.
I could be wrong. Then there's the mobile broadbands, which I bet you every person in this room has in their pocket. My phone tells me that given the right circumstances, I can get like 50 megs up and down on it. And the next generation, the G5 stuff, is apparently going to be faster still, and has sort of halted, at least Google has cited in the past that it's why they stopped rolling out new markets with Google's Wi-Fi project, Google Fiber. Google's Fiber project, Google Fiber, not their Wi-Fi project. Those of you in the more rural parts of our fine, beautiful country might be familiar with this two-way satellite nonsense. Download speeds as much as 25 megabytes per second. Are the caps still like 400 megabytes of download data? Or are they any better?
I don't have a daily cap, but I only get 10 gigs for the entire month.
Dang it, so that's like less than my cell phone gets.
Yeah, it's less than my cell phone gets.
Which means basically you can use the internet, but you better not turn on Netflix, or we're having a fight.
Yeah.
It's no good. So a 10 gig cap, it was 400. I couldn't believe that when they told me. I was like immediately like, nope, get that thing off my roof. Nobody told me that.
I can pay for more gigs if I want, but I'm already paying $60 a month for 10 gigs.
Is each additional gig $6, or is it?
Like I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, we were like, no, we're just gonna ride out our contract and then leave.
And after the contract's up, what are you gonna do?
There's a wireless ISP
That can see you? Indubitably. So there's a bunch of them out there. So the guy from Comcast I was in a meeting with basically explained that what's really going on is that these providers are not providers of services. They are construction companies that do this, that dig these giant trenches down roads and put wires in them. That there is fiber to the home. Good luck getting that going on anytime soon. We're looking at Lightspeed here in town on the map. That's what they're doing. Digging holes, pulling wires, lots of fun. After that, it's kind of like what's available to you. If you live on the middle of nowhere, you might be able to get some kind of WiMAX. You might be able to get, you for sure can get satellite if you have a view of the southern facing sky. Maybe cell phone mobile. That's what we wound up doing after we gave HughesNet the heave-ho. Got some options. They're not great though.
You don't get cell phone service at our house.
So that's not an option. Put an antenna on the roof maybe?
We got a booster so we can make phone calls, but yeah.
It's only boosting the
Half
2G
mile
part of
in
it.
every direction, perfect signal. Right where we are.
Nothing.
Nothing.
I've done some wireless analysis. Since we would have to put transmitters and receivers up on towers, one time we had a guy up on a tower, and I was like, hey, take this with you and point it north. And I gave him the coordinates. And I tried to get a data backhaul to my house, but it turned out there was now there's houses on it, but there's a hill on, that's 12 Mile, that is, there's this thing called a Frenzel zone. A signal has to be able to get wide and get small again to the receiver for it to work properly. And like half of that is this hill. So I spent some time on my roof though, looking at all the various signals I could see, because that's the kind of nerd I am. And there is a very active cell tower, and that's when I figured out that was probably the best way to go for us. But it would be interesting to do that. He was up there anyway. I mean, and you could connect to it. I could hook up to it right up until that hill. So if I was on the other side of 12 Mile, I could get out of my car and point this transmitter receiver at the tower. And it was an experiment. Experimenting is part of the gig.
You just had a transmitter receiver.
They're like $60. I mean, it's not like $1 million or anything. A company called Gigafiber, light fiber, wire fiber, something like that. Oh yeah, we had a guy at one of the security conferences hook a high power wireless transmitter receiver up here at the tip of the mitten, and was getting marina wireless signals from across the lake. Yeah, so done properly. When you talk about like, you don't have to worry, nobody can get our Wi-Fi from here, take your phone, go out into the parking lot, you can't see it. Well, yeah, maybe. PPPoE, you may have heard of. That's that point-to-point protocol we were talking about. You can throw that, and everything that comes along with it. The PAP and CHAP, connecting and giving you security. You could, my ISDN way back in the day had PPP connections. DSL don't do that. They've got their own security protocols. So here's PC1 connecting to the interwebs over that PPPoE using Ethernet as the layer below the PPP part that's going to do all that stuff for us. Just how your DSL connects over to the interwebs. So Ethernet cable goes over and connects, and then basically tunneling over that Ethernet connection using PPP, and then IP on top of that. So that way you get internet over the DSL lines. If then you have a customer side, so now imagine you've decided that you're going to go into the ISP business. You have to go out to a customer site and set up their end of this PPPoE nonsense. You'll have an interface that is the dial-up modem, so the DSL modem in this case. Set up the inbound authentication. So the host name is Fred, and the password is Barney. You think they're trying to tell us that this is sort of old-timey? I don't know. So on the other end, on the ISP's router, the username is Fred and the password is Barney. And the status is paid in full. They can go on and connect. And then the dialer pool gets turned on, like bringing up the interface kind of. And then in the gigabit interface, the client dialer pool is set up here as the PPoE client. Step 2, show me. So then somebody tries to connect to internets over gigabit Ethernet. What did we set it up on? On gigabit Ethernet 00. Gigabit Ethernet 1 is the client network side, the client's network facing side, so their computer's default gateway. It goes to connect to the internet. The modem brings up the connection, tells Fred that the password is Barney, and the internet happens. We hope. So if you want to go through after we've set all that up and verify that it's happened, you can do show IP interface brief, and hopefully you see something like what we've got going on for dialer 2 here, where it says, here's the IP address, is it okay, how did it connect, is it up, is the protocol up? If so, you're off to a good start. The maximum transmission unit, or MTU, they recommend you keep it under 1500, so right there they set it to 1492, and they did that a couple of slides ago too, if you caught it. And then how is it connected? It's encapsulated over PPP, so we're doing PPP over Ethernet. It's created a couple of routes. So we've got a directly connected route that'll get you to these addresses. And if you do show PPP OE session, you'll actually see what's going on, the session ID, the remote and local MAC addresses. You will know that you have a DSL modem that is connected to a DSLAM. I told you as far as like, we got to get our excitement wherever you can find it. So stuff to watch for when you're setting one of these bad boys up. If the negotiation fails, if you would put Fred and Bernie instead of Fred and Barney, the authentication wouldn't work. And then that segment size, they want you to keep it under 1500 because otherwise it will break. So you can turn on the debug and see all of that stuff. So here we've turned on debug for PPP negotiation, and as it goes through and connects, we find out that the state is open, that the chap begins, send along Fred, success, start getting addresses. Here we get a address for the interface, 10.1.3.2, which is a little squinty. And then it creates the route, install route to 110.1.3.2. And then it turns off debugging by undebug all, a useful command to keep yourself from having to look at all kinds of nonsense. The authentication process is basically just host name and password, which you can see in the running configuration. You want to make sure those are right. If you turn on debug for PPP negotiation, you can see that fly across the wire when the host name and interfaces, using the host name from CHAP, using the password from CHAP, and it passes it along. And if it stops at that point, well, you've got an issue that you need to go back and fix. And you will see something like that. Authentication failure. Exontig Euromark AE, which I think is a error in pasting, but
Mine just has the A with
has the which?
it says extra symbols than mine.
Uh-oh. I've got the special version.
Here.
All right, so MTU size. Sometimes you could have a problem when you go to do the whole three-way handshake thing that we've been talking about since Cisco 1, where the maximum segment size gets us into trouble. Now, you get to set that inside of your headers. You set that MTU, the maximum transmission unit size, that we glossed over earlier, of 1500. So they would like you to scale that down to, if you've got the header, you've got 20 bytes on either side of that, gets you down to 1416. PPP OE only supports 1492 because you've got 8 bytes worth of PPP info going on. So that's not good. Let me see if they've got pictures of it. So here's your first 1500 bytes. You've got Ethernet over here, you've got the frame correction here, the IP's maximum transmission unit, the Ethernet's maximum transmission unit. If you adjust that a little bit to account for those 8 bytes that need to go to the whole PPPoE process, now you can scale that back. And you can see like where you'd get in trouble here is if the computer on the other side didn't get the memo that it's supposed to be doing that, well, then you've got problems. So you can change that. Here they've adjusted the interface dialer 2 and set the MTU to 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And on the other side, the router 1 interface, gigabit 000, they set the IP TCP adjust MSS to 1452 to count for the 20 bytes of the header on either side of that, and to stop problems from occurring. You can also use the IP TCP adjust MSS max segment size to help prevent those kind of things from screwing up and getting dropped. So all this PPPoE nonsense, having to squeeze in 8 bytes more header, causes a bunch of issues, which we can then straighten out by playing around with those maximum sizes. Fun, huh? There's a lab that we can do if we had a DSL line, and then we could troubleshoot it. But let's not. So who's ever heard of a VPN? All right, we'll just skip over this entire section. Well, maybe we should, just in case somebody felt shy and didn't want to say it. We should talk about it a little bit. So here's the Cisco corporate office with an ASA firewall on one side. We've got a business partner out here who's got a router, a regional office with a firewall, somebody's house with a little router, and then Cisco AnyConnect, Cisco's very own VPN client software, available at a very reasonable rate to connect to all that stuff. In fact, I think it's free when you get your SmartNet contract and you buy a firewall. An interesting exercise would be to see if you could get OpenVPN to talk to an ASA. I don't know if you could. So why do this thing? Well, what is this thing, first off? So we've got a bunch of people who are connecting remotely over this internet cloud thing through these tunnels, if you will, of encrypted communications. Super clever. That allows us to use the public internet while not being concerned that somebody's going to be sitting there looking at the contents of all of our traffic, which would be bad, particularly if you were like a bank or if you had the codes to launch nuclear missiles. So instead of buying one of those expensive frame relays or MPLS lines or maybe the Metro Ethernet or whatever, you can save a bundle of money by using whatever connection is most cost effective and using a virtual private network to create an encrypted tunnel through which you send your traffic back to the mothership. It scales up nicely, meaning you can add a corporate office here, a small home office here, a salesperson on the road using AnyConnect here, and still continue to grow and grow and grow. This works with any kind of internet connection that supports IP. So if you've got DSL and you've got cable and you've got some, it probably doesn't work with satellite. I mean, technically it works with satellite, but it's probably garbage. And the whole reason you do this is security, so that nobody's sniffing passwords and all that kind of stuff over the wire, because that's bad. Nobody wants that. Read my passwords. So you guys should be able to understand the benefits of those VPNs that I just mentioned. When you do it from one site to another site, frequently with a router like the ones in those boxes there, or with a ASA firewall, also included in our in-seat labs here, or any computer that can run Windows software. Site to site generally, though, you have a device configured to do that. So my Asus home firewall will do that just fine. It means that now those folks can be on the same local area network, essentially, the wide area network at this point, and do business without worrying about somebody eavesdropping. If you have a road warrior who needs to connect their laptop directly to the mothership, maybe they're connecting on a hotel Wi-Fi, maybe they're at a coffee house, maybe they're at on their cell phone connection, they're tethered to their phone. You can use the VPN to securely, again, connect back to the mothership and use those resources without worrying about somebody screwing you up. So Cisco has fancy software that will let you create dynamic, multi-point virtual private networks, or DMVPN, an initialism that you say, not an acronym that you pronounce. It's kind of this hub-to-spoke technology. Those include the following protocols: NHRP, or Next Hop Resolution Protocol, the multi-point generic routing encapsulation, or GRE, which we'll look at in a little more depth, and then IPsec, which is a secure method for encrypting IP communications, which is pretty cool. NRP is layer 2. It's kind of like ARP, except for finding out where things are. GRE is that generic routing encapsulation, and it's a way to create a not very encrypted tunnel between two sites. So you need to go through and do some encryption on top of that generic encapsulation nonsense. Otherwise, you are prone to let people read things. And then on top of all that is IPsec, which is an open encryption standard for standard for encrypting IP. And now you can have either a hub-to-spoke or a spoke-to-spoke tunnel, where spoke A can talk to spoke C and spoke B can talk to A or C, encrypted, even though they might actually go back through the mothership. So I mentioned we'd talk about this, right? The generic routing encapsulation. So it's not secure, it's not encrypted. So don't transmit the launch codes over one of these connections. And it's basically Cisco's cheap and easy way to set up a direct connection that you can do routing over and encapsulate some other protocol. So generally speaking, it's going to be IPv4 6, but you could also do AppleTalk. You could also do old-timey DECnet if you had a router from back in the day. Or if you still believed in Novell, you could do IPXSPX. But at this point, it's a little bit like believing in fairies. So inside of that, there is a flag to let you know that we're GREing, and inside of that, there's a flag to let you know that what protocol is inside of the encapsulation. So in this case, OX800, that's just 4 hex digits with 8 at the front, will let you know that IPv4 is inside of that payload. So it's basically just saying, after you get to this point, all the stuff over here is going to be IPv4. And there's one for DECnet, and there's one for AppleTalk, and there's one for IPXSPX. So GRE doesn't do anything smart like control flow. Again, it doesn't have any security, so you need to encrypt inside of it. And then that header space is going to chew up another 24 bytes of overhead. So if you're doing it over something tricky, that's going to be a problem. So this will be in your lab. Creating a tunnel, you create a tunnel interface using the command interface tunnel whatever, and say, okay, we're going to create tunnel 0. Configure an IP address for that tunnel. Normally you're going to use a non-routable IP address. It would be kind of a waste of a routable IP address. Source IP, destination IP, and then turn it on. You also could tell it that it's in tunnel interface mode, but then it's up and running. So step 1, interface tunnel, tunnel mode, GRE, IP, give it an address, source, destination, give it a router. So OSPF1. We're going to assign it a routing protocol so it can actually send stuff over it. And then in that router, in that OSPF1 instance, if you remember back to setting up dynamic routing protocols, inside of that instance say, this is how you get to that network. So here's the tunnel, interface tunnel 0, the mode and what kind of tunnel it is, the IP address of the tunnel, source and destination, and then this is the routing information for the stuff in that tunnel. Because if you've got this tunnel but no routes set up, no packets will go over it, and it doesn't do anybody any good. And router 2, same deal. Give the tunnel a name, tell us what encapsulation we're using, the address, the source and the destination, which should be exactly backwards from the other one. So router 2's source is itself, and router 2's destination is router 1, and vice versa. And then again, set up a route for it, and off it goes. So those are the commands you need to know, in addition to a little routing. And that's GRE tunnel. Once it comes up, if you do show interface tunnel or show IP interface brief, it will tell you what's going on. So in this case, it tells us that tunnel 0 is set to manual and it's up. And if you do show interface tunnel 0, you learn that the protocol is up, that the internet address is this, that the source and destination are hopefully what we set them to be, and that it's transporting IP. Conceivably, it could be transporting something else, but not terribly likely. Now that we know that the connection's up, if you do show IP OSPF neighbor, they'll be talking to each other, we hope, and they will know about one another and start exchanging routing information and all that fun stuff. So they should show up in that list. I think those are all the tips and tricks they have for making sure that's there. Yep, show IP tunnel, show OSPF neighbor. Should that not work, well, after you look at the interfaces, do a show IP interface brief, do a show IP interface brief on the other side of the connection. It's also wise to look at the routes. And there is a packet tracer where you can do all of those things. Set it up, troubleshoot it. This will be a one that'll be fun to try in seat. So I guess holding up. We're getting there. We'll talk about interior and exterior gateway protocols, and we'll try and land this sucker. So we talked about RIP, EIGRP, and OSPF. Those are all inside the house kind of routing protocols, not really designed to be to play nice on the internet. BGP is an exterior gateway routing protocol, and that's how the internet works. That's how the internet do. BGP, lots of it, half a gig of it or so. YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, GRCC, all are autonomous systems, and they've reached out and got themselves a unique 16 or 32-bit autonomous system number, which Cisco informs us we will not be delving too deeply into. The private ones anyways. For the time being, know that somebody hands out autonomous system numbers and you use them to set up BGP. And you've got options. So if you run a big, if you run like a big data shop, like a Netflix or somebody like that, you might consider like the pain in the butt that it would be to manage multiple different types of routing protocols. Maybe I don't want to use OSPF, maybe I certainly don't want to use RIP. So you might make your life a little bit easier by using eBGP for external connections between autonomous systems, and internally use iBGP for the routers that we use in our shop. That said, go get a CCNA if you want to know about the I guess CCNP would be the next step up if you want to know about that, because we're just going to talk about the external stuff here. BGP is useful if your autonomous system connects to other autonomous systems. So if you're Netflix and you need to connect to Comcast and to Charter and to AT&T so that your customers can look at your stuff. If you remember, like a couple of years ago, there was this big kerfuffle between Comcast and Netflix over just that sort of a thing. What it came down to basically was that there was one router that was connecting big chunks of Comcast's network to Netflix, and they didn't want to upgrade it, and if Netflix wanted more connectivity, they should have to pay for it. And these are the kind of politics that go on when you have to route packets around the internet. Because really, who should be paying for that extra connection between Netflix and Charter, or Comcast, or whoever it was? Which customer, though? The Netflix customer or the Charter customer? Everybody pay more money. Just pass that on. Pass the savings on to nobody. And we talked about like the pretty serious downsides of screwing up BGP router updates. The guys in, what was it? It was one of the Emirates that wanted to suppress Twitter. So they put, the idea was they were going to put a bogus route. It's like, here's all their customers. They were going to put a bogus route in to say Twitter goes nowhere. Except they didn't forget to stop that from replicating out to this guy and 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 this guy. And since the change replicated out across the internet, all of a sudden everybody is sending Twitter to nowhere. And that's kind of one of the problems with BGP. And if you do enough of that, they'll take your autonomous system away from you and you won't be able to do that anymore. So if you are not an autonomous system, you probably should stay clear of BGP. Just figure out, like if you're company A here, a static route's gonna be fine. If you're a stub network, essentially, even if you're a large network, like a large business, if your business isn't internet, yeah, maybe you just connect to whoever. If you don't have folks who really, really understand BGP, and I'm talking like more than got through chapter 3 in CCNA4, you know, probably have spent some time in the industry, because once you can make changes to the global internet routing table, you can break the internet. Or you can misuse it. The Russians recently, we assume this was an error, I'm sure, but recently routed a bunch of domains into a autonomous system that had been like cold for 2 years for 10 minutes and then routed it back out. So basically what they did was they became a man in the middle for those connections for a little while and then put it back, which security researchers kind of think was probably just a test run to make sure they could do it. But if you've got an autonomous system and you can update the internet's global routing table, you can cause a lot of trouble. This is another one of those instances where we should like step back for a second and just marvel at the fact that this all works at all. Knowing that there's a couple 10,000 autonomous systems out there that any one of the administrators can jack up and take down the internet. Freaking amazing that this all works. So we'll at least show you how to set it up. You've got some options. You could set it up to be a default route only, meaning that basically you're just going to get one connection. So you're not going to be setting this up if you've got, if you're company A here and you have multiple connections, you're not going to do that. But if you're ISP 1 and 2, you can set that up. You could add extra routes, so multiple connections out of your ISP, and then you could do the whole internet thing. You could download that half meg-ish routing table and know how to get to everything on the internet. Very special. Big player in the game. Currently, the number is a little over 500,000 networks that you would know how to get to. So that's cool. So I guess 10,000 was a low number for number of autonomous systems. 550,000. So it's big. All you need to do is set one up. So go set up your BGP, router, BGP, get configured first, get enabled, configure terminal, router, BGP, then plunk in your old autonomous system number that you got from ICANN or whoever. Tell it who the closest BGP neighbor is. Give it the old autonomous system number for that. So Netflix is over there. Comcast is over there. Network address, netmask. The subnet mask of the network over there. Presto. You've configured yourself a big old chunk of the internet. So here is the 65,000 autonomous system for company A connecting over to autonomous system 65,001. On company A, you go in and set up BGP 65,000, give it the address of the neighbor. Here he is, he's 209.165.201.1. The remote autonomous system number is 65,001. It's a /24. Do the same thing on the other end, backwards. So say, I'm router BGP 65,001. My neighbor's address is thus. His autonomous system number is thus. Network is 000, which means it's going to match everything, because that's the one that goes to the internet. So all routes that we don't have a better match for go out that way. So the default gateway, if you will. And it's off and running. Voila. That's all it takes. You can now set up the internet. Congratulations. Just start your own internet with autonomous system number 1 and keep incrementing. You'll be fine. So once you've done that, you want to make sure it works. Show IP route, show IP BGP, show IP BGP summary will give you the routes, the networks you've learned about from BGP, so things that are in the BGP table, that big routing table we were talking about. And then the summary will show you what you've learned in summary. Here is show IP route on our previously created network. 0.0.0, the default gateway is set up on company A's router to go to company B's router, and from there out onto the internet. So that is as we would like it to be. If company A shows IP BGP, it knows about the external network, and everything else is on the other side of gigabit 0/1, and stuff on the inside stays on the inside. Here's show IP BGP summary. Tells you the router identifier, which is its IP address, and then its local autonomous system number. What it knows about in the network, so it knows about 2 network entries, it knows about 2 paths. It knows about its one neighbor, this guy over here in autonomous system 65,001. It knows how many messages have been received and sent, the version of the table, which we'll get into later. That's about it. That is setting up BGP right there. How long it's been up? Skipped over that. Bam! You can create an external border gateway protocol network. And all of this will be tested in the Packet Tracer Skills Integration Challenge assigned for this week.